Good evening. I'm Celie Brown, Board Chair of the Federation. It's wonderful to see you all here. We are so excited to share the Greater Seattle Jewish Community Study with you tonight. As a matter of fact, we're so excited and we want so many people to see it that we're videotaping it. It will be on our website sometime next week. Also, we had the same kind of town hall meeting last night at Temple de Hirsch, and that was also videotaped so that you could get a different Q&A aspect of it, and that will also be on the website. We launched this project last spring to find out not only our community's demographics, but more importantly, the needs, the wants, the affiliations, the attitudes on a range of important issues. Now that the data is actually here, so what do we get? First question, so what are you going to do with it? Well, the pat answer is, and I'll read it to you, the study will provide Jewish communal organizations a greater understanding of their constituencies and enable them to plan for the future with better information. Yeah, but they still ask, how is that going to happen? So let me share with you what we at Federation have done so far to start this important process. Late in January, we brought together agencies, synagogues, organizations, and their lay leadership for an in-depth presentation by the Cohen Center just to get the conversation started. Yesterday, there were 3 breakout sessions led by the Cohen Center focusing in on synagogues and their membership, formal and informal education, and young adults. Today, the breakout group was for programming and culture. Additionally, there's a teleconference set up for sometime in the next few weeks between the Cohen Center and the day schools. Those having a special interest in these topics were invited to meet with the Cohen Center to dig deeper into the meaning of the results for each specific area to help them to begin to work together to take action. The ultimate objective is to help our wonderful Jewish community flourish in the future. I'd now like to introduce our President and CEO, Keith Dvorchak.
I want to thank you all for coming. It really is an exciting moment. You know, the study really has such an incredible wealth of information in it. As you came in today, you were given sort of the Cliff Notes version. If you haven't downloaded the full version from our website, I encourage you to do so and spend some time really digging into it. I've probably been through it about 20 times, and I still find new nuggets every time that I go through it. I want to take a moment to begin by thanking the committee who really helped us design this, what we were going to accomplish in the study, and 2 key staff members who really shepherded the project from beginning to where we are today. And that's Noah Guder and Amy Finn. So Noah and Amy, they really did tremendous, tremendous work to enable us to be able to have not just this meeting tonight, but hopefully, things that will actually be transforming Jewish life in Seattle. We're very lucky tonight to have with us the 2 primary researchers on our community study. That's Len Sachs and Matt Boxer. To give you an idea, I've heard them talk about this multiple times, and I still learn something new every time that they talk. They still find interesting and different nuggets. So even though I've heard it many times, it still is new and it's still fresh. Len is probably the preeminent researcher on birthright Israel, and I know from my experience he's going to be able to help us understand how that's also affecting our community as part of this study. So with that, I'd like to give you Len and Matt.
So I'm delighted to be here. This works, yes? Delighted to be here. It's been a privilege to work with the Federation, a privilege to work with Keith and the staff, Noah, Amy, et cetera, et cetera. and great to see so many of you out here tonight and be in this beautiful facility. I'm going to provide a couple of minutes of context, and then I'm going to turn over the presentation to my colleague, Matt Boxer, and then I'll come back at the end to make some wrap-up comments. I wanted to provide context in terms of Jewish tradition. If you will, the proof text for why we're here tonight is in Tanakh. The clearest description of it is Parashat Bamidbar, where Adonai, God, instructs Moses, and says, Se'u et rosh kol adat b'nei Yisrael. Now, usually we translate that as take a census of the entire Jewish people. Those of you who are Hebrew chochim, scholars, wise people, know that it actually means lift up the heads of all of the children of Israel. And the commentary on it, Rashi says this is God's way of saying that the Jewish people are beloved. It's also a way, and it's made clear in the parasha, that it's a way of assessing the strength of the community, the number of people who can defend the Israelites in the desert as they prepare to enter the Holy Land. Now, nothing in Jewish life is simple. And there's always, if you will, the other hand. So on the one hand, we have a very clear instruction. It's part of our tradition. It's in Tanakh that we take a census. But there's this other position, and we actually read most years on the Shabbat when we read B'midbar. We read the Haftorah, which says we are like sand. We are so numerous that we are like the individual pieces of sand, and we cannot be counted, and we should not be measured. So what gives? We have, if you will, two contradictory perspectives. The Jewish way around these two contradictory instructions are to do counting in indirect ways. So actually the census, we're going to read about it in a couple of weeks as part of Shemot. The first census is using a half shekel. So each person gives a half shekel, and so you're not actually counting people, you're counting shekalim. What we do in the modern era is something a little bit different, but it's also indirect. We've not taken a census of the greater Seattle Jewish community. We've used a variety of methods to conduct a survey, and we've used other surveys of the greater Seattle area to estimate the size of the population. And you're going to hear in our language tonight a bit of tentativeness. So this is we're going to use terms like estimate, and if you press us a little bit, we're going to talk about confidence intervals. So we think we have, and we have applied what I think are leading state-of-the-art methods to studying this community. We think we have done a study which gives you a picture, a snapshot of the greater Seattle Jewish community as of 2014. Around the edges, and if you dig really deep into particular communities and particular subgroups, it gets a little less accurate. But we think we have a very interesting story to tell you about what we see of your community. And the challenge, as Keith said, is now for you to take this information and to use it to enhance Jewish life, to enhance the meaningfulness of Jewish life in the community. So I'm going to start now and just run through two introductory slides just to get us all on the same page and the beginning of a conversation. So the first goal for this study was to estimate the size of the population, the geographic distribution within the greater Seattle area of the Jewish population, the demographic profile, and the Jewish identification. So we want to know how many, and who are you, and where are you? The second part of it is to really dig in deeper and to understand the characteristics of Jewish community members in terms of background, in terms of your needs, in terms of your attitudes about the community, about your engagement with different organizations in the community, and your behavior. What you actually do, what the community members actually do in terms of interacting and affiliating with the community. And we do this all to be useful to you, to inform communal planning. We want to provide, the term of art these days is actionable data, data that you can use to take action, to make decisions about. We do it by drawing a representative portrait of the community. And we've also spent a fair amount of time. If you read the report, you'll see it's in two parts. In part two, we talk about specific subgroups in the community. Not every subgroup, because not every group is large enough in the context of a community study to assess it. I was asked to talk about our methods. And part of the context for talking about our methods is that studies of the Jewish community are probably, Professor Burstein is here, a colleague at the University of Washington, and he can, I think, attest to this, how difficult it is to do a study of a Jewish community. So why are we so hard? Is it like our disagreeableness, our lack of interest or motivation? Well, it's not actually those things. The first problem that we have in studying Jewish communities is that we no longer live as a set of tribes in a desert. We live as part of a greater community, and we are only a few percentage points of the community. We are a small population within a much larger population. And because the United States Census, because of freedom of religion provisions, does not, unlike the censuses in most countries, ask questions about religious identification, you can't weight, you don't have a standard against which you can measure a survey. So we have to use all kinds of other methods. The old method was to do what was called random digit dial telephoning, where you would randomly call people. Now across the country, Jews are a little over 2% of the population. So that meant that you had to call almost 50 people to find, you had to interview 50 people to find one Jewish person. And you would have to call these 50 people and say, hey, are you Jewish? And that was the method. So we've developed some other methods. I'll just quickly describe them. We use organizational lists from, I think it was 40 organizations in the community, much larger than other studies which have only used, I think your 2001 study only used the Federation list. And it turns out that most Jews are known by an organization in the community, even if they're not members, but they're known by those organizations. We also use what's called an ethnic name frame. It's not just Jewish names, it's a whole bunch of other things. There's a third method that we use, I'll talk about in a moment. We sent out a survey that was completed by over 3,000 people, by the way, which is the size of the Pew survey of all of American Jews. And the interviews were done by folks at the university. We weight the results, and for those non-statisticians in the audience, what that means is that we adjust the results to fit what we think is the population, the Jewish population, and we do that by using data. The SSRI here stands for the Steinhardt Social Research Institute. We've collected about 1,000 surveys done by the federal government, by large organizations, which ask a question about religious identification, and we use a synthesis of those results to adjust the survey results. I will talk about what JBRs are in just a moment. And then what we've tried to do is to analyze the results to give you a picture, a portrait of the community, to look at those subgroups for which we have a sufficient number of people, And we've also prepared a data set that we hope other people will use, both the community will use and that researchers at other places will use. So I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague Matt Boxer, and he's going to talk about the specific results, and then I'll come back at the end.
So to begin with, what you're looking at here is a chart tracking the growth of the Jewish community dating back to the 1940s. One of the first things we did when we started studying this community was we looked for population estimates that had previously been developed from other studies, and it turned out there were several available. Only reports of the 2000 to 2001 study, the 1990 study, and one in 1978, I believe it was, but the 1978 study reported previous estimates as well. As you can see, there's a trajectory of growth dating all the way back to the 1940s, and it's accelerated quite significantly in the last 20 years or so. And this has an awful lot to do with local industry. When Jewish communities are growing, it typically has something to do with good jobs being available. Jews are much better educated than the general population of the United States. We tend to go where the jobs are, and you have a couple of big employers in the area. So there are a couple of reasons that the community's been growing so rapidly. Newcomers have an awful lot to do with it. It turns out that fewer than 1/4 of the Jews in the greater Seattle area were born here, which means the vast majority had to move here at some point. And 1/5, a little over 1/5, have arrived within the past 10 years, and about half have lived in Seattle for 20 years or more, which means half have arrived in Seattle in the last 20 years. That's where an awful lot of the growth has come from. Most of the newcomers live within the city of Seattle, and in fact, most of the Jews in the greater Seattle area, we looked at 5 counties in particular, 57% live in the city of Seattle. It's been a common trend nationally. People move back to the center cities. There are a lot more cultural and social amenities there. Young Jews in particular, who are common among the newcomers, they're moving to the central cities. They're not moving out to Mercer Island or Bellevue or Redmond or the other suburbs. They want to be in the central cities. Only 11% of the Jews in the area expect to leave. They expect to move away at any point. Seattle is a destination city. It's a place that Jews move to. It's not really a place that very many Jews move away from. And so what this means is that you can expect the population, the Jewish population in particular, to continue to grow for at least the next 10 years. The proportion of newcomers, though, also presents a challenge to the community because it means that an awful lot of people here don't have very significant ties to the local Jewish community. You have 18% of respondents indicating that they have adult children in the community, and you have 30% of households that are raising children in this community, but that also means you have another half or so who don't necessarily have familial ties here, although there are some who have their parents around as well. 79% of households in the area indicate that they own their homes. Again, this has to do with people move here, they intend to stay, they don't want to leave. They're going to establish roots, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have the pre-existing roots to the Jewish community. Those take some time to develop. And that's going to be a theme that we're going to come back to a little later in the presentation. Here you see the basic age pattern of the community. The graphic is something called a population pyramid. And when you see a population pyramid that shows a substantial thick area at the bottom, that indicates that you have a large number of children. That typically indicates a community that is growing, particularly when coupled with, at the top, you have this area of relatively few elderly people. Fully a quarter of the population are under the age of 18. Fully 25% of the population are children, compared to only 5% that are 75 or older. There's actually little variation in Jewish identity across the age groups, which is unusual. In most communities, younger Jews tend to be a little bit less religiously affiliated, older Jews tend to be a little bit more religious, but there's very little variation here. Here you see, this is called a dot density map, and it represents where the Jews in the area live. And we looked at 5 counties in particular for this study: King County, Pierce, Kitsap, Snohomish, and Island. The vast majority of the Jews in the greater Seattle area live in King County, and the majority of those live in the city of Seattle. Mercer Island, which, let's see if I can get the... no, maybe not. The vast majority live in the city of Seattle, but we also have this component in Mercer Island, which is right over here. Let me see if I can get the presentation going again. There we go. Each dot represents 25 households, but the important point here is you can see where they're clustered. They're very heavily clustered in the central city. There are also significant clusters in some of the major suburbs: Mercer Island, Bellevue, and Redmond. And you can see where the other households are, but much, much smaller concentrations. And here, Len did not actually explain what JBR stands for, but it's actually pretty important. Jewish identity is confusing to pretty much everyone. But David Ben-Gurion was famous for, among other things, saying that where there are 2 Jews, there are 3 opinions. We have 63,400 Jews in the greater Seattle area, so we have something like 90,000 opinions about what it means to be Jewish. Today, it's pretty clear. Jews don't only identify as Jewish by religion. JBR stands for Jewish by religion. 68% of the Jews in the greater Seattle area identify as Jewish by religion. That is, the religion that they practice is Judaism. 32% identify as Jewish by some means other than religion. That is to say, they're Jewish, but the religion that they don't practice is Judaism. Typically they're atheists, they're agnostic, but they have Jewish parents. They're Jewish by culture, they're Jewish by ethnicity. They have some key tie to the Jewish community. They're very proud to be Jewish. They're very proud to count themselves as members of the tribe, as it were, but they don't practice Judaism as a religion. They're still Jews, though. They're still part of the Jewish community, and it's important to recognize that. Again, typically, you see variation here between the age cohorts. Younger people tend to be much more likely to identify as Jewish by some means other than religion, and older people tend to be much more likely to identify as Jewish by religion. Here, it was pretty consistent across age groups, which is very unusual. This is typically how I know I'm looking at a Jewish community. Nationally, about 30%, maybe a third of people have college degrees. Here in the greater Seattle area, we estimate it at 89%. It doesn't get much higher than that, and 55% have advanced degrees, master's degree, doctorate, or professional. As you might expect from such a well-educated community, it's also a relatively affluent community. 54% of households report income of $100,000 or more, $100,000 a year or more, I should say. This is of households that agreed to answer the question about income. About 25% of households in the survey responded, "I prefer not to answer." We've found on past surveys, though, that typically the people who specifically indicate, "I prefer not to answer," tend to come from the higher income categories. So the proportion might actually be even higher than what you see here. And this is a relatively affluent community by any standard, but even compared to other Jewish communities. Here you see affiliations with synagogues, both for people who are Jewish by religion and for people who are Jewish by some means other than religion. And it's not really surprising that there's a significant difference between those two groups. Synagogues are, of course, the organization par excellence representing Jews by religion. They are, after all, inherently religious institutions. And so 55% of local Jews by religion have joined a synagogue. They've joined a congregation, a chavurah, a minyan, some type of Jewish congregation, compared to only 7% of Jews by some means other than religion. Now, this might strike you as a little bit odd. They're not Jewish by religion, but they're still affiliating with Jewish religious institutions. Again, what's important to remember, they're Jews. They're part of the community. They're going to do things that other Jews do, and there are plenty of Jews by religion who don't affiliate with congregations. But the important thing to remember here is that there are plenty of people who identify as Jewish by some means other than religion. They still join religious organizations. It's part of being a member of the community. And here we have how frequently people attend services. And as you might expect, people who are Jewish by religion are much more likely to attend services ever, as well as more frequently. 88% of Jews by religion attend at least once or twice a year. These are people who you might have heard as high holiday Jews. 2/3 of Jews not by religion never attend services. So again, some significant differences, but and it's curious that of the people who don't identify religiously, still 33% attend services at least once or twice a year. They're still participating in religious activities. In terms of denominational affiliation, the curious thing here is that you have a much higher proportion compared to most communities of people who don't really identify with a particular denomination. 41% identify as secular or culturally Jewish or just Jewish, compared to 7% of Orthodox, 14% conservative, 28% Reform. There were a handful who identified with other denominations, Reconstructionist, Renewal, less than 2%. And so we didn't include them in the chart. But these are your main categories here. And what's notable is a much higher proportion of the Jews in this community than in other communities do not identify with a particular denomination. And the intermarriage rate here is about on par with what you see in other communities. But what you typically see in other communities is a much higher intermarriage rate among younger cohorts than among older cohorts. Here, the only place where we really see a big difference is among the 65 and older. It's significantly lower there than it is in the other cohorts, though higher than we typically see in that cohort in many other communities. And it's important to note that children of intermarried parents are Jewish. This is something that has not always been taken for granted in the American Jewish community. But of intermarried parents, 38% are raising their children Jewish. 13% of the children are being raised partly Jewish as opposed to exclusively Jewish. 2% are being raised not Jewish. That is, they're being raised in some other religion typically. And 45% are being raised in no religion, or the parents haven't decided yet, which means there's an opportunity here. If the concern, and we hear this all the time, this is the rhetoric about Jewish children these days, that every Jewish soul is sacred, and we want to keep our children as members of the Jewish community. Here you have a very large proportion that the Jewish community worries are going to grow up and not have much of a Jewish identity. But just because the parents haven't decided yet or they're being raised in no religion does not mean there's no chance that they will be Jews as adults. They can be raised as Jews with no religion. They can be raised with cultural Judaism. They can have ties to the Jewish community. There are opportunities here to reach out to the families that have these children and bring them into the fold, as it were. Some of them are already here. And it's important to remember that as the intermarried families are actually the majority of married couples in this community, it's a substantial proportion of the community. And they're very active, actually, in Jewish educational programming. Again, If you look at the intermarried parents, of their children who are age eligible, 20% are attending Jewish preschools. A third are sending their children to Jewish supplementary schools, Hebrew schools. 2% are sending their kids to day school. And 41% of the children of intermarried parents who are old enough have had a bar bat mitzvah. So again, the children of intermarriage, we used to think they don't get any Jewish education at all. It's very clear in this community an awful lot of them are getting some pretty substantial Jewish education. Though, of course, as the educators would say, there's always room for more. And I mentioned before we were going to come back to this theme of lack of a connection to the local Jewish community. Here we see that we asked a series of questions. To what extent do you feel a connection to Jewish history, Jewish customs, Jews around the world, Jewish peers, Israel, and the local Jewish community? And the scores are pretty high on most of these. When you see that 56% of respondents feel very much a connection to Jewish history, 31% feel very much a connection to Israel, 56% if we combine very much and somewhat, the local Jewish community, much lower connection than all of these other categories. Again, some of this has to do with the fact that you have an awful lot of newcomers. They just haven't developed the close ties. When we look at the comments that people made about the great strengths and the great challenges in this community, it's interesting to see that there's some discrepancies. Some people talk about what a close-knit and open and welcoming community this is. And some people talk about how it can be cliquish and it can be hard to break in. And it's pretty readily apparent that the ones who feel that it's most open, that it's most welcoming, are people who have those close ties. They've been here for a long time. They grew up here, they live here, they know the routine, as it were. Of course, it's open and welcoming to them because they are the core of the community in many ways. But for the newcomers, it can be a little tough to break in. It can be a little scary being the new kid in class. And that's what it feels like for a lot of the people who have come in the last 10 to 20 years. They just haven't made that connection to the local Jewish community yet, but they feel very strong connection to Jews as a whole, Jews around the world, the global Jewish community, and the state of Israel as well. Here we've broken it down by where people live. And you'll see here in the left two columns, this is basically southwest and northwest Seattle, and southeast and northeast Seattle. The dividing point between east and west is basically I-5. And the dividing point between north-south is the Ship Canal. Not surprisingly, if again, this is connection to the local Jewish community, the people who feel most connected to the Jewish community are the people who live in the places where you have the most Jewish infrastructure. Here on Mercer Island, the people who live here feel very connected to the local Jewish community because you have everything here. You've got synagogues, you've got schools, you've got the J, and who wouldn't love this? But you go to West Seattle, and 30% feel not at all connected to the local Jewish community. Only 12% feel very much connected. You think about what Jewish infrastructure exists in Northwest Seattle. Is there any Jewish infrastructure in Northwest Seattle? There's very, very little organized. There are a handful of sort of informal organizations around, but not too many people know about them, including the people who talk about participating in them. I've got 5 people we meet for a book club, a cooking class. It's not really anything very structured. Where there are very few things like that to create ties to the local Jewish community, people who live there can't develop those ties very easily. The places where you have everything, Mercer Island, Redmond, close. It's more somewhat than very much. Bellevue, very strong ties to the local Jewish community. West Seattle, not so much. And the places outside of the core areas, when you get farther out in King County and when you get into the surrounding counties where there's much less infrastructure, it's much harder to develop those ties. And now we've gotten to Len's favorite topic, so I'm going to hand the presentation back to him.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. So I'm just going to talk, this is one more data slide, and then we'll do some concluding comments, give us time for lots of questions after Keith makes some comments. So these are the data about Israel travel, and yes, been to Israel on the left side. And what you see here is quite interesting. A very high proportion of people, particularly young adults, have been to Israel. Now, why do we think young adults have been to Israel? Birthright Israel, right. So in fact, the majority of that group of JBRs has been to Israel on birthright. What's also interesting here is that the JNRs, the cultural, secular, non-religious young people, have also been at fairly substantial rates. One explanation, we can talk more about it, is that this is an affluent community. So across the board, more people have the resources to be able to travel to Israel, even if they don't get the taglit, the birthright gift. And of course, that is related to attachment to Israel. So amongst JBRs, what you see is very high levels of attachment. Almost 3/4 of the population feel emotionally attached to the population amongst the Jews by religion. And what you see, and I think to the extent that Israel has been a hot button issue, I'm trying to come up with language that won't get me in trouble here, but has been a hot issue in the community, I think it's explained by this difference between the JNRs and the JBRs, that there is a large portion, almost 40% of the JNRs who don't feel any connection to Israel at all. They're at the other extreme from those who feel a very high connection, and it's that huge gap that creates perhaps some of the tension. So I'd like to finish up, both kind of summarize, but also to answer the question that always comes up when we present a community study. How unique are we as a community? Tell me, not what we are, but how are we different? So some of these things have been alluded to and said directly as well by Matt. But the first thing that jumps out about this community is the high proportion of, I can't say JNRs, secular Jews, if you'll excuse. I'm going to generalize compared to those who identify by religion. So you've got almost 1/3 of the community. Nationally, it's about 22%. So that's a huge, sort of a huge difference. And you also have a high proportion of people who say that they're secular, they're not, they don't identify with a denomination. What's also interesting is that the JBRs are fairly highly engaged. So if you're not just a cultural Jew, if you are a Jew by religion, even though proportionally you're a smaller group, you're pretty connected, and that is evidenced in part by the high number of people who are part of a congregation, a synagogue, minyan, etc. As well, many people have visited Israel, and as I mentioned a moment ago, feel this strong emotional connection to Israel. Now, as we look at the community, what we see, and if you will, comparing Seattle to other communities, partly because, and it's related to this JNR, JBR ratio, you've got tremendous diversity. And that's both a strength, and it's also, I won't say a weakness, but a challenge. So the strength is you've got lots of different folks, lots of different kinds of families, lots of people who connect to their Jewish identity in different ways. I don't know if there are 90,000, maybe there are 150,000 ways in a population of 63,000, but there are lots of different ways. And that's both a challenge for you as a community to come together to bridge some of the differences across diverse groups, and clearly in the case of Israel, bridging the gap and the divergence of people's view is a critical issue. So I thank you, and I'm now going to turn it back over to Keith.
So while the next slides get put up, I want to highlight something that Len had talked about earlier, and that was the size of our data set. Our data set's 3,058, which in and of itself isn't that meaningful. When you talk about the Pew study, and Len referenced that it was close, there were about 3,475 in the Pew study, and that was used for the entire country. So what that means is that the confidence intervals are much smaller. What it means is that the data that we have is much more reliable when we talk about the estimates. It's not that they're perfect, it's that it's very, very likely that they're accurate or very close to being accurate. It also means that when we look at the data, we can actually slice and dice it a little bit more than a lot of other communities can. A lot of the work that the Cohen Center was able to do, for example, in interfaith families for us, is because we have as much data on the children of interfaith families as most other communities in their studies have on just interfaith families. So it's a very, very robust data set, and it really allows us to answer the question, so what? So as Celie referenced earlier in her remarks, when we created the study, one of the really smart things that the committee did is they decided we were going to put everything to the so what test. If we found out that there were 500 more Jews in Olympia than we knew, so what? Would we do anything with it? If the answer is no, and in this case the answer is no, why do we even need to know that information? We wanted that actionable information. We wanted information that we could actually use to change our community, things that we could actually take and make differences in our community. And because of that, we were able to collect data that did that, which is what you see in the study. The other thing that we did is we listened to the Cohen Center and Len and Matt very well. They said, don't tell us what questions to ask. Tell us what it is you want to know. Let us design the questions. And so we went out to the community and to the agencies and said, what is it that you want to know? And because we asked, what do you want to know, the Cohen Center was able to draft questions that gave us the information that we wanted. If we were to just pick the questions that we wanted, they probably would have been very biased and wouldn't have given us the type of information that we wanted. So we're really looking at things that we can use. So for me, this is one of the most significant pieces that we have, where we actually live. And because of that, as Matt said, when we talk about Northwest Seattle, 13% of our population lives in Northwest Seattle. We have no Jewish infrastructure there. If you live in Northwest Seattle and you want to put your child in Jewish early childhood, you have to drive to Northeast Seattle, even if you work downtown. Not so easy. We make it very, very difficult for that 13% to do anything Jewish. Now, when you overlay that with the data about traffic, and we all know about traffic, 30 minutes is the most anybody really is willing to drive to get anywhere. They'd prefer 20 minutes. Sometimes it seems like it might take 20 minutes to get from here to Herzl. When you live in Northwest Seattle, even if you do belong to a synagogue, even if you do want to go to services, sometimes it's just not possible unless you're willing to drive 45 minutes to an hour. I was talking to somebody today who said in the summer, when they want to go to services, it can take them up to an hour and a half to get to services. So they don't go in the summer. The traffic patterns really affect what we do. When we look at our institutions, that's part of the challenge, because we can't move the JCC from where it is now to Northwest Seattle for a program. That doesn't work. We've got to find ways to get out in our community. We've got to find ways to make it possible for people to connect without having to drive 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. And it doesn't look like the traffic patterns are getting any better. I don't know how many of you saw the news report where they were talking about changing the HOV lane from 2 passengers to 3 passengers because we don't meet the speed limit requirement there. So it'll be great if you happen to have 3 people in your car, you might go a little faster. If you don't, all those 2 people cars are going to get pushed into the regular traffic, which is going to make it even worse. So as we begin to look at what we're going to do, I think it's really going to be important that we look at what I'm basically calling neighborhood Judaism. We're going to have to create things that are local. We're going to have to bring the programs. We're going to have to bring Jewish life to people because for them to get to our institutions is not easy. When you look at Southwest Seattle, it's 4%. Now, they're lucky enough to have a synagogue that if they want to participate in, they can. Other than that, it's difficult. And I don't know about most of you, but I try to avoid the West Seattle Bridge as often as I can. And here's the traffic time. Again, you see 58% don't want to spend more than 20 minutes going anywhere. And that doesn't get you very far. So we talked, Len and Matt both talked about children that are being raised. When you look at that 45% that's not decided, that's a huge opportunity for us. And one of the things I want to overlay here relates to that education piece. So nationally, I believe it's 28% of Americans have college degrees. The Jewish numbers from the Pew study said 58% of Jews have college degrees. And in the 5-county Seattle, and we particularly looked at the white 5-county numbers, it's 58% have college degrees. If you remember, ours is 89%. So it's not only huge compared to America, it's huge compared to Seattle. Now, just to put a little more to that, that means 11% don't have college degrees. Of that 11% that don't have college degrees, 9% have some college or are currently in college. So we have 2% with a high school education or less. We have a very well-educated, very intelligent community that demands that type of quality in everything that they do. We have to be able to provide that type of quality. Our community is very unique that way. When we talk about that 45% that haven't decided, we have to find ways to give them meaningful Jewish experiences. A lot of them, if they have, particularly the one Jewish parent, may not have had the most incredible religious school experience or Jewish experience. They're expecting it to be something that's dumbed down. They're expecting it to be at a 3rd grade level. We have to make sure that we're presenting to them something that is appropriate to who they are as people. More than just the college numbers, when you look at the graduate numbers, the studies show that 10% of Americans have graduate degrees, some postgraduate degree. 28% of Americans have postgraduate degrees. And as Matt and Len said, 55% of Jewish Seattle has a postgraduate degree. More than 1 out of every 2. So again, it highlights, to me that was a putting the glasses on kind of moment about our community, that education is so critical. As Jews, education is critical to us. As Jews here in Seattle, it's even more critical. And when we overlay why we choose the schools that we choose the schools that we choose first based on the quality of education, second, convenience, and third, a strong belief in a public education. So if we want our children to be involved in any sort of Jewish education, it has to be top-notch quality. Whether it's day school, whether it's early childhood, whether it's religious school, whatever type of education it is, it has to be and it has to be convenient, because people aren't going to drive their children long distances. When we talk about youth group activities, it's the same thing. It's got to be in a place where you can actually drive your child to and not spend more time getting there and back than your child spends while they're there. Some great opportunities for us, but also some real challenges. So that 45% is going to be a huge, huge number for us, and a huge area for us all to work together to address. So when we were doing the interviewing process for the community study, one of the questions that we asked Len during the interview was, how would you recommend that we refresh the data? Because when you do a study every 10 to 12 years, after 2, 3, 4 years, it's old. Things have changed. New people have moved in. New programs have started. The realities that are here are going to be different. How would you refresh that? And what Len said at that time was really prophetic. I appreciated it then. Now I really appreciate it even more. And what he said is I wouldn't just refresh the data, because that doesn't necessarily work. What I would do is pick subsets and dig deep. And you need to do that on a regular basis. Every year, pick one area and really dig deep. Ask the deep questions. So maybe you pick synagogue life and you find out from the synagogues, what is it that you want to know? And you do a deep dive study just on synagogue life. Why people join, why they don't join, what they like, what they don't like, what's convenient, what's not convenient, to really understand that, because then you can make actionable decisions based on that. And the next year you pick another one, and the next year you pick another one, and the next year you pick another one. And you continue to do that, because that continues to give us new data that we can continuously be working on. Now what's fascinating is, in our study, Len talked about the random digit dialing as the old model. With the model that they did, we really pushed the Cohen Center because we wanted to include online surveying. The Cohen Center, luckily, and this is part of why we chose them, is looking to find the newest, the most cutting-edge ways to collect this data, and so it was a great shidduch that way. And so they agreed to do it, and they created a way that it was statistically valid, so that the information collected via online surveys could be used to generalize. And the goal was 300 online surveys, that would be a pretty robust response. We didn't get 300. We got over 2,000. So what it tells me is that if we follow Len's suggestion, if we do these deep dives, if we get the right people asking the right questions and put it in front of our community, we'll be able to collect that data. And that's something you're going to see a lot coming from the Federation moving forward, is working on behalf of the community in partnership with the organizations that already exist to collect the data that we can use as a community. I think it's one of the most important things we can do for our community, is to help us understand the community. So we're going to move now into the question and answer session. Rachel right here is going to take the microphone and walk around, and that's how we'll go ahead and ask questions.
Hi, thanks. My name's Benjamin. I have 2 questions, both of them just to clear up some technical issues. One, the first is the intermarriage slide, if you could show it again at some point. My question was, when you're doing the counts, are the in-married couples counted twice or once? That's my first question. And my second question is, when you indicate that we have a larger percentage of secular Jews than the Pew survey counts, how can you be sure that you're not better at reaching them than Pew was?
Right. So first, the intermarriage figures. This is a household survey, so the intermarriage figures are based on couples, individual households, not 1 Jew, 2 Jews. It's the household rate. This is typically what's reported across surveys, though. So where the Pew study reported that nationally the intermarriage rate was, I believe, was 56%, and here was 58%, it's very, very similar. The second, are we better at finding these, these secular, cultural, just Jewish people than the Pew study? The problem with random digit dialing, I think, is that, well, there are many problems with random digit dialing, but among the most important is that where you can use it in a national study, you can't in a local study. People can move around with their phone numbers. This is my home phone right here. And the reason it's my home phone, I'm one of those people. There are about 50% of us nationwide. This is all we have. We don't have landlines. We only have cell phones. I have a Boston area phone number on mine because the building I live in, my doorbell rings to this. it's really annoying when somebody rings my doorbell at 6 in the morning and I'm in Seattle. It's 3 o'clock here. But the only reason I have a Boston area phone number is because of that. If I didn't, I would still have a phone number from Madison, Wisconsin, where I lived before I moved back to Boston. In a national study, that doesn't matter so much. You can still find everybody you want in a national study if you're calling random phone numbers. In a local study, you're going to miss all those people who moved to the area who don't have greater Seattle area phone numbers, and you're unfortunately going to find an awful lot of people, well, maybe not quite so many here, because as we established, this is a destination city. People don't leave. They want to stay here. But the 11% who are moving away, they're going to keep their phone numbers. There's absolutely no reason to change your phone number anymore unless you need a landline for some specific reason. You need a local phone number for business, for personal, for whatever. Most people aren't changing their phone numbers when they move anymore. So random digit dialing just makes it impossible to find people in local studies. Nationally, it still works just fine. So we think Pew actually did a decent job finding the secular Jews. It's just for a local procedure, we have to do something a little bit different. We do think we found we had a better result finding the secular Jews than the people who did the 2000 to 2001 study did. But some of that is just the technology is better, the methods are better. It's a little easier to find them now and get them to complete surveys.
If I can also just really quickly say two things. One is that it's the ratio of people, and that we're even more confident in the ratio than we are in the actual numbers. The second part of it is that we have cross-validated our findings against what we know in terms of population data about Seattle. So we've looked at can we predict the number of people who are members of synagogues? Can we predict the number of children in day schools? The numbers that are actually known, and where we had data, we were very close. So that gives us confidence that we know this.
And just to give a personal example of what Matt was talking about, I still have my Florida phone number. And when they did a community study in Miami just a year ago, they used random digit dialing. So I got a phone call.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
One for Len about Israel and about the number of visits to Israel and the attachment to Israel. I didn't see a comparison to the rest of the nation.
It's higher than the rest of the nation. The rest of the nation, the Israel visit rate is around 50% for the Jews by religion, and somewhat lower for the Jews not by religion. But as I indicated, visits to Israel are highly correlated with income. So if we actually weighted the national data, we haven't done it, but if we weighted the national data or the local data by the national income, I think the Seattle rate would be about the same. So what it means is that you have more people having visited because you have a more affluent community than the nation as a whole. And the second part was...
That's a good thing.
That's a good thing.
Second thing, I didn't hear anything about languages. How many Jews speak Hebrew? How many speak Yiddish?
Do you remember?
Did you do anything with languages?
Yeah.
No, we did not ask about languages spoken in the home. We did hear anecdotally through some of the, well, it's not really anecdotally, it's systematically collected through the survey. There were a number of people who talked about learning Hebrew, studying Yiddish, speaking Russian even. There was even a couple of references to Ladino. In fact, we cited an article that Emily Alhadeff had written about the resurgence of Ladino in the community in the report. I think it's on page 27. This has come up several times. But the resurgence of Ladino we thought that was an important marker because you have one of the largest Sephardic populations in the country as well. We just didn't ask about languages spoken in the home, which would be the standard way to figure it out.
Is it on? Yeah,
Yes.
okay. Amongst the intermarried, did you break that down in terms of what % of the intermarried actually converted into Judaism? And if so, how then that correlated with things like attachment to Israel, of memberships in synagogues and that type of thing? The second question is, of those people who live in areas like northwest Seattle or southwest Seattle, any correlation with whether these people move there because they don't want to necessarily identify, right, and they move to those areas? Like I moved to Mercer Island many years ago because I wanted to have the JCC and Herzl near Tamid close by.
So the intermarriage rate, as we calculate it, if it's a marriage of somebody who was born Jewish and somebody who converted to Judaism, as far as our analysis is concerned, that's an in-marriage. It's not an intermarriage. Sometimes we do analyses comparing in-marriages to intermarriages to conversionary marriages, which is the sort you're talking about, but there just aren't enough cases of conversion to do anything realistic with. As far as what are the reasons why people move to the area, we did specifically ask why people move to the area. Pro or con related to the Jewish community was a rare response. People talked about for jobs, for quality of life, for family reasons. They didn't talk about, I moved to this area because I wanted to avoid the Jewish community, or I moved to this area because there were so many Jewish resources available on Mercer Island that I couldn't help but live anywhere. I couldn't even think about living anywhere else. It didn't seem to, and this is something we find in other studies as well. The vast majority of people, when they're moving to an area, they're not really thinking about the Jewish amenities per se. They're thinking about other things, and then the Jewish amenities are something that they think about afterward.
Right, but at the same time, we want to be very clear to say that we're not talking, this is not cause and effect. In other words, we don't know which it is, whether the presence of Jewish institutions causes people to get engaged, or the other way, the lack of interest doesn't. On the other hand, it is clear that the population is now located in ways that don't match where the infrastructure exists.
And we also know that economically, it's much more affordable to buy a house in Northwest Seattle than it is on Mercer Island. So with this younger group moving to Seattle, from an economic point of view, they may or may not want to live on Mercer Island, but they just may not be able to afford to live on Mercer Island or on the east side, but they can afford to live in Northwest Seattle.
I have a question that relates to what you've just been talking about. The model that you, Keith, have been talking about is sort of a reverse field of dreams. Instead of building it and they shall come, it's more, we'll go where they are. But that strikes me as kind of scary in terms of the resources required to build something or other in Magnolia or wherever. And, how far along has the federations or other Jewish institution thinking gone in that direction?
So we're just in the beginning stages of analyzing the data and figuring out how to do that. I think it's fairly clear that, and just a few articles that I read written about this nationally, that the idea of building a JCC in Northeast or Northwest Seattle isn't necessarily something that's likely or that would be the best use of resources. But it may be that partnering or renting space in order to allow us to do that would be much more affordable and much more impactful. And I think as we begin to look at it, that's the sort of thing that we'll want to look at. What sort of space can we find that will allow us to do what we want to do? One example, just using the JCC partnered with Beth Am, and there is early childhood program at Beth Am. We need to find other potential partners, whether it's renting storefront space for neighborhood early childhood programs, whether it's utilizing community centers that exist in order to be able to have sports activities. But we're going to have to look at other ways to be able to do it because the resources aren't there to build a new synagogue in Northwest Seattle or in Magnolia, but there may be resources available to rent the space so that we can have Friday night and Saturday services, or so that we use coffee shops or bookstores as Jewish learning centers. A great example is our PJ Library program, where 5 days a week we have song and story times all over the place, and some of them happen to be in Jewish institutions, here at the JCC, in some of the synagogues, but they're also at bookstores and other places, and we'll want to look for those opportunities.
I'll just talk loud. Okay. In the geographic data, did you compare that to the general population? Are the pockets parallel to what the general population is, or are they distinctly different?
So we didn't do a whole lot of analysis about the general population, just on the specific figures. I think it's clear that in general, it's not just Jews, it's everyone is moving back toward the central city. But Jews are congregating in very specific areas, and the pattern does not match up exactly with the general population. Exactly how similar or how different it is, I can't really quantify. We didn't analyze it quite that carefully, but it's not exactly the same.
Working? Oh, good. First of all, I just really would like to congratulate the Jewish Federation of Greater Seattle and the Cohen Center on what is likely one of the most important studies for this community of the early 21st century, and I'm excited as a member of this community for the results and the outcomes that we will all see in the coming years. My question is as follows. In this community, I believe that Seattle Jewry raises about $25 million in philanthropic income to benefit the community. The number is probably even higher if you add tuition and what have you, but I'm going to separate that for a moment. I look at philanthropic income as investment. And the question is, based on the data that you have, and as you think about what we have learned as a community, about what Seattle's Jewish community needs for its future growth, what would you recommend as the area, or the one or two areas, where Seattle's Jewish leadership should be looking to make its biggest bets?
Okay. We talked about that this morning. So for me, Aleph, number one, top of the list. It could be number 1, 2, and 3 is chinuch, is Jewish education. That what we know from every community we study, from the national community, is that the quality and the reach of Jewish education is what moves everything else. And the key to Jewish education is not only quality programs, as Keith said, but it's also moving away from siloed Jewish education, where each type of education, preschool camps, overnight camps, day schools, supplementary schools, are, if you will, enterprises unto themselves, and there's not a connection, and there's not a handoff, and there's not a linkage. And also, we often think of Jewish education as just for children, but a community that educates its children also has to educate its adults and its parents at every stage of the way. So if I were making bets, my bets would heavily be placed on education. I think the second piece is outreach to the people who are not part of the community. To be Jewish is to be part of a kahal. It's to be part of a community. It's not an accident that this is a Jewish community center. The issue with intermarriage, I don't know if you saw or you paid attention to the fact that only 2%, virtually nothing. That's the error in statistics. Only 2% of children of intermarriage are being raised in another religion. That's extraordinary. That really is extraordinary. And the fact that so many people haven't decided how they're going to raise their children, Now, it may be that they're waiting until the child is 7 or 8 years old and they contemplate whether they want to have them go to Hebrew school, supplemental school, to prepare for celebration of bar bat mitzvah. But it means that there's an opportunity. So outreach is the second. And then I think, the third issue, and I don't know how, I'm certainly not a communal planner, is the infrastructure issue. How do you match where people are with the infrastructure? And probably you can do that, as Keith was explaining. You don't have to build a whole lot of new institutions. You may just have to use existing institutions in a better way, in a more collaborative way, et cetera. So that would be my three.
And building just a little bit off when Len was talking about the education in the study, one of the things, going back first, we talked about how well educated we are, but one of the items that was listed highest in terms of the type of programs that people wanted was education. And so we have to make sure that we're providing that education in lots of different ways, not just for children, but also for adults, in meaningful ways, in ways where they don't have to be a Torah scholar to understand what the concept is. And we have to be able to create things that are kind of like the Law and Order model. So if you think of what Law and Order made famous, it was the whole concept that you could start the episode and by the end of the episode you saw the whole story, and then the next week it was a brand new story. So if you missed an episode, it doesn't matter. We've got to create those opportunities where it's open, it's inviting, you can learn something real that's quality, that's high level, that you kind of chew on. And if you have to miss a week, you're not behind. You just missed whatever went on that week, and there's something new than when you're walking in. And that's something that we can really focus on.
Coming back to this opportunity of these 45% of kids who raise non-Jewish and intermarried families, there are obvious differences between families that are intermarried families that are raising their kids Jewish and not raising their kids Jewish. Do you have any information on the demographics of what the percentage is of fathers who are Jewish and mothers who are Jewish in each of those groups?
I don't remember. Do you know from this study? I know in general.
I don't remember off the top of my head. I think I'm remembering this correctly, but it's been a couple of months since I looked at that particular piece of data. I think it was fairly even. It might have been slightly more Jewish mothers than Jewish fathers, but it was pretty close, I think.
Yeah, I mean, nationally, it's not. The gap is changing. It used to be it was mostly Jewish mothers raising Jewish children. Didn't matter who the father was. They were raising Jewish children if they themselves had Jewish education. But the last couple of years, that difference is narrowing.
So the study showed 92% would like to be at least a little more connected. At least a little more is kind of a loose, sometimes it might be just a polite, sure, maybe. But there's definite interest. We just have to find ways to make it so it's not so hard, particularly with the geographic challenges that we have and with some of the perceptions that exist. It always fascinates me how, sometimes I think that, if we had, God himself here speaking at a synagogue, if you didn't belong to that synagogue, you wouldn't go because you'd think you weren't welcome. And so, so we really, those are challenges that we have to address to make it so it's accessible.
He can't afford Mercer Island. That's his issue. So let me answer. No, but let me answer the question a slightly different way. People don't know what they don't already know. And to give you the birthright, the Taglit example about this, if you'd done a survey 15 years ago, 16 years ago, before Taglit started, and you asked young people, college students, whether they wanted to go to Israel and spend Shabbos in Yerushalayim, go to the Kotel, none of them would have said they were interested. They go on the program, they come back, and that day at 25 hours in Yerushalayim becomes this important experience, no matter what prior experience they've had. So the problem that we have today is that a lot of people didn't have, I'll call it the opportunity, to experience rich Jewish home life, community life, what have you. And you have to give them Shabbos dinner in order to get them to understand that they might want to do that. So that's part of the trick. So it's not as simple as simply asking people what they want. They have to see it first before, in some cases, they can engage it. Yeah.
I actually have two questions. First has to do with the education, why people identify as an education as they get the Israel bag, what it is. Did you ask questions to identify those things, identify why somebody does identify themselves as Jewish, be it a religious Jew or a not religious Jew?
Not really, no. We asked, do you identify as a Jew? Do you or any other adult in your household identify as Jewish? Yes or no? Do you have Jewish parents? Yes or no? Or does anyone in the household have Jewish parents? Do you consider yourself Jewish in any other way? If the answer to any of those questions for you or any other adult in the household was yes, you got into the survey. And then we had a series of questions about your Jewish background, but not so much about why you consider yourself Jewish, other than we had enough to classify people as Jews by religion as opposed to Jews by some other means. What exactly it means to be Jewish, you look at, as I said, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. You look around this room, everybody here probably has a slightly different sense. It would have been very interesting to ask that, but in the context of a survey that was already 30 minutes long, which was trying some of our respondents' patience, we didn't feel like we could responsibly ask that when there were so many other things we were trying to get at for the benefit of the community.
But I would also say that those are really hard questions for people to answer, even if it's not in the context of a survey. So a lot of what we did is to look at what are the precursors to these different identities. And that's where, if you will, my comment about Jewish education comes. Those people who've had positive Jewish education experiences and have had different Jewish education experiences, informal, having gone to camp, gone to Israel, etc., had formal Jewish education, and some home positive role modeling of being part of the Jewish people. Those are the people who most strongly identify.
My second question is has to do with, you're talking about what you do with the information. My question is, how are you going to decide what you're going to do with the information? Who's doing the plan? What organizations are involved? Is that happening now? When will that happen? Those kinds of things.
So it's beginning now. We've got a committee at the Federation that's been looking at the study and looking at what some of the ideas are, and then we'll begin to look at who the natural partners are in order to work together. So there are lots of wonderful organizations and wonderful partners, and we've got to make sure that it's something that they want to do. So we're only in the beginning part of that process. I think that there are some themes that are pretty clear when you read the study, and then it's a matter of, okay, how do you take the theme into things we can actually do? How do we find who are the people who are going to help us to actually accomplish it? What's it really going to cost? And then how are we going to measure the impact? Because at the end of the day, we want to be able to say that we started, it was here, and 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road, it's somewhere different, and this is what we've actually been able to accomplish.
And I can say, as the outsider in this, I'm very impressed with the number of people and the different groups that we've been asked to meet with. It's not just been the Federation groups, but each of 6 different subgroups in the community.
So you raised some surprise about one of the slides where you were surprised that the commitment levels of the older people in the community was not any greater than those of the younger, and it was flat. And
Right.
I have a question about that, but a couple of maybe stereotypes and generalizations first.
Get them out.
Yeah. I came here in 1975 when I was in high school, and the kind of stereotype here is that people came here in the 80s and 90s basically to hide. And that since then, perhaps, and I have a 24-year-old daughter, so I see some of this, that people are instead coming here for jobs. And maybe they're coming here from more established Jewish communities. And my question is there evidence in the survey that maybe that the people under 35 here are coming here with a different attitude than maybe those that are older? And does it provide us any hope for a vanguard for the next generation of the community? And just, is there anything in the study that would bear that out?
Yeah. So I think you're probably correct. I've had a similar impression about the data, that the story of American Jewry has been its graying, and how people who are engaged in the community are the older people. If you look at the conservative movement, the average age, the median age, has gone up fairly dramatically, and that was the central movement of the 50s and the 60s, and even I think into the 70s. So that may be the explanation for the flattening out. I think the reason for hope, and we should always be hopeful in the Jewish community, is that so many people are proud of being Jewish, that so many people want to be counted as Jewish, even if they're not religiously involved. And the newcomers, they're a source of tremendous strength, but they're not moving, many of them, because they're younger, can't afford, or they're not in a position to live in the suburbs that have the most elaborate infrastructure, and so they're in the city, and that's the challenge for the community, figuring out how to engage those people. I also think, by the way, that something has changed. And the intermarriage piece of it is a very important piece. I'll give you my 60 seconds on intermarriage and how it's changed. If you want to read about it, go to a piece that I wrote in Tablet a while back. There's a fundamental change that has occurred in the millennial generation, which are people born after 1981. Prior to 1981, if you were if you were the child of intermarried parents, it was less likely than chance that you would yourself as an adult identify as Jewish. And it was very unlikely that you got Jewish education. That completely changed with those born in 1981 and after. So in the 1990s and the 2000s, you saw a tremendous increase in Jewish education with the children of intermarried parents, regardless of whether their parent or their Jewish parent was the mother or the father. And I think in what's happened is that since the 1990s, actually since the 1990 Jewish population, National Jewish Population Study, which found that 52% of recent marriages were intermarriages, there's been a dramatic shift in the Jewish community, tremendous investment in Jewish education, and you're seeing that in the young generation, particularly the millennial generation, but even people slightly older than that, so the 35 to 40 years. So that's hopeful. That's good. That's positive.
I think it's also worth reiterating, though, that and we did specifically ask people why they're moving here. The newcomers are disproportionately younger. They're coming here for jobs. They're coming here because it's a really good quality of life. They're coming here because they have other family who are here. And those are really the top three reasons. If I could add a fourth, particularly for the younger people, you have a really good university here, one of the best in the country. Paul, I'm sure you could speak to this. So it was one of the places that I looked at when I was applying to graduate schools. I didn't really want to move all the way across the country. I don't see my family enough as it is, but they're all on the East Coast. But it's a top school, and I was only looking at the top schools. You've got lots of people who are moving here just to go there. And it turns out that the students who go to UW, like anybody else in the community, they don't leave. They stick around because, if you want a good job, this is a great place to be. As for what their Jewish background is coming in, though, it depends. We know what the Jewish background is of the people who live in this community and the people who are raised in this community, but they're coming from all over the place. So there's a little bit of a mishmash there. I don't think people are coming here to hide anymore. That might have been the case 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It might have even been the case 10 years ago, but it's really not the case now.
Good. I think we got time for a couple more questions. Yeah.
I came here when I was a child at 3 years old. So I've been here most of my life. The only time I left was 6 years in the Navy. The Navy or military model, I can speak only to the Navy, is that we had Jewish lay leaders on ships of a significant size. So the ship I was on, a service ship, had 950, and so I was the lay leader. Anywhere where there was Jewish people who wanted to get together, there was a lay leader appointed. So in our case, that gave the rabbi for Naval Forces Japan a contact in southern Japan to set up events. And in fact, the Navy has even set up an MOS, or a job rating, of chaplain's assistant now. So has there been consideration of that for people who live in areas where there are no services?
Absolutely. One of the things that we really want to be able to do is create the environment where we can do that. And even if they don't necessarily live there, do we have people who are willing to drive 10 minutes out of their way to make sure that there is Jewish life there? And one of the things that we found is that there are some of those lay leaders. So in Northwest Seattle, there are people who do things in their home. It's not well known. It's not advertised to the public. But if we were to begin to create the environment where it wouldn't necessarily have to be in their basement, but could be somewhere else, and where they didn't have to have only 12 people, because that's all that fit, but could have 30, that they'd be willing to do that. So that's absolutely one of the ways that we're looking at being able to see Jewish life in areas where there aren't the physical structures.
But I also want to I'll make a more general point for those who have had to be with me, the staff at the Federation, the last 2 days. You've heard more than a few times use the term agency. That people, young people in particular, want to feel ownership. They want to feel in control. And in fact, one of the most difficult issues for a community is the lay professional balance, and how to take advantage of professionals, on the other hand, without disempowering lay people, how to engage them at all levels. And that's a challenge across the board, and it's clearly one of the most important potential things a community could do.
Did you ask any questions about where people are getting their information about Jewish events and the ease of getting that information?
Yes, we absolutely did. So we asked it in two different contexts. First was how you prefer to receive your information, in print, electronically, no preference. And it turns out, and this is Seattle, very tech-savvy population, 56% indicated that they strongly preferred to receive information via electronic means as opposed to in print. And there was also a substantial chunk who had no preference. That creates other kinds of problems. It's cheaper to send information electronically than through the mail, but we're also inundated with electronic mail these days. I was looking at my inbox at one point a couple hours ago and saw I had 758 unread messages. Those are all from this week. It's a busy job. But I imagine there are other people in this room who have a similar load, and so it can be a little bit difficult to make sure that people are getting the information they want that way. That's a challenge that we heard from some people from the J today, something that they're struggling with a little bit. The other context in which we asked the question was, who do you go to if you want information? Response number 1 was friends. Response number 2 was the internet, or as one particular respondent put it, notably, the Google. People can find anything anywhere these days. I wonder, we didn't really look at it in this context, I wonder the extent to which that changes based on where in the area you live. If you live in Northwest Seattle and there's really no formal organized infrastructure there, are you more likely to use the Google to find your Jewish information and less likely to contact a friend because your friends might also be in the same boat as you? And a substantial number also said they would contact a rabbi, a local Jewish professional or lay leader, but friends and the internet were far and away the top 2 responses.
He meant to say the Bing, right?
The Google.
Right.
So I want to thank everybody for coming. We're going to close right now. Len and Matt will be around to answer further questions individually for anybody that didn't get a chance to ask it during the session. Thank you very much.